God has specifically chosen you to be here at this time and in this place. You have incredible potential, purpose, and calling to push back the darkness and be a light for Christ. Stand for nothing and you'll fall for anything. It's time to stand your ground. This is Unapologetic.
Hi, everyone, and happy summer. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unapologetic. Summer is definitely in full swing around here. So to go along with the hot weather, we're starting a new summer series on some of the hot button issues and hot topics we've covered here on UNA. Welcome to Unapologetic Hot Takes. From culture wars and politics to abortion and transgenderism, we're diving in and going there. You'll hear from some of the biggest voices in these arenas today, individuals who are unafraid to speak truth and unapologetically share the gospel. We hope these conversations between Julia and her guest will inspire you to live boldly wherever you find yourself, leaving you empowered and equipped to be the hands and feet of Jesus to everyone you meet. We hope you enjoy this episode of our summer series, Unapologetic Hot Takes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Unapologetic Podcast. This week, I'm sitting down with best-selling authors Dave and Ashley Willis, whose marriage-related books, blogs, the Naked Marriage podcast, speaking events, and media resources have reached millions of couples around the world. Dave and Ashley are a husband and wife team who have made it their mission to help couples have healthy, godly, and naked marriages. We'll get into what a naked marriage actually means later on in this episode, so don't get too worried. But Dave and Ashley are parents to 4 young boys. They're also part of the amazing EXO marriage team that spoke at one of our marriage conferences here at First Dallas, and I was able to be a part of that. But I know that you will love today's honest, fun, and encouraging conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Dave and Ashley. Wow. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Julia. It is a privilege being back at First Dallas and hanging out with you, and it's an honor to be here.
It is.
I'm so excited. So we'll start out we'll ask every guest, and ladies first, what do you wish Christians would stop apologizing for?
Oh my goodness. I think just in general, just kind of their imperfections. I feel like so many times, and I'm talking about myself here, just fighting, wanting, feeling like God expects us to be perfect when he in fact knows we're not perfect and that we need him. We need Jesus desperately every day. And I think too, in the work that we do with marriages, I think this holds true. Yeah. Stop apologizing for that and work through it and be close to Jesus.
That's great.
It's good, but you are perfect. So how do you have
He knows all too well
to apologize for? That's a good answer. It's a tough one to follow. I would say we should stop apologizing for being different or even for being weird sometimes. I think we want to blend in so much that we forget that it's okay to be different, that we're called to be in the world but not of it. And sometimes what we do when we're following Jesus is going to be countercultural, and that's okay. Yeah. And so don't apologize for it. Just keep doing your part to be faithful. And sometimes it'll fit in what you're doing, and sometimes it'll stand out. But as long as we're following Jesus, we're always going to be heading in the right direction.
That reminds me, it was one of my favorite things I ever heard at a youth ministers conference. And it was the most important thing to teach your children is to stand alone. And I've never forgotten that. I heard that when I was a teenager. But that really, sometimes you're really going to look differently, especially in the topic we're talking about today, which is sexuality. And I said I was going to do this at the beginning of the show. Parents, this probably is not a conversation for your little elementary school students, but we're so glad that you tuned in because everyone needs to hear today's show. We know sexuality is definitely getting taken over by the enemy and society, and we just need to reclaim it. So let's start out with, where do you see culture getting it wrong, and even Christians getting it wrong?
Man,
you want to go first?
You go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, wow. It's such a great question. And thank you just for being willing to host an important conversation about it, because I think so often, we as Christians, sometimes we pull back and we think, well, I don't know what to say. And it's easier to just kind of put our heads in the sand and not talk about it at all. And so I applaud you for just being willing to host the conversation. And we're trying to do our part, both as parents, of trying to raise sons we've got 4 boys and trying to raise them with purity and with a healthy view of sexuality and understanding what that means. We're trying to understand what that means as a married couple. Yeah. And then also what it means in the position God has placed us in to encourage other married couples to really help them. And there's a lot going on, but a few of the high points that I think we see in our work. Number one is that the prevalence of pornography has completely just altered people's mindsets as it relates to what sex should be. And, that's part of my past story. I was one of the millions of teenagers who was exposed to that as a teen. And then that really reprogrammed my mind in a toxic way to see sex as a distorted thing instead of seeing it as the pure gift that God intended it to be within marriage. And that's something we really had to work through. And in the work we're doing now, we see that millions of couples, even within the church, are struggling with that right now, both men and women. It's not just a male problem anymore. There's so many women that are struggling as well. And so we talk a lot about that and all the reasons why it's toxic and harmful. And, Jesus said to look with lust is really a mental act, a spiritual act of infidelity. And we've got to be not only physically monogamous, but mentally monogamous. And so that's part of it. And I think on the other extreme, where pornography is on one extreme for the kind of the promiscuous sinful aspect of it, at least mentally, on the other extreme, I think that there's a misconception in the church that like we pull away from sex altogether, even as married couples, because we've bought into the lie that, well, that's the devil's thing. And so I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to enjoy it because it feels wrong or it feels dirty. And we miss out on the fact that God meant this to be a gift, a beautiful gift. And so when we talk about a naked marriage, it's not just physical nakedness, even though that's part of it, but it's going back to Adam and Eve, the first couple in the garden. They were naked and unashamed, getting to that place where we can be honest, open, transparent, and intimate on all levels, not just physically, to really experience sex and all aspects of intimacy the way that God intended. But every couple has their own unique set of baggage that holds them back from that. And so we're just trying to have conversations like this one to help couples work through whatever's holding them back from experiencing that.
Yes, because I feel like, Dave mentioned baggage. And when we hear the word baggage, when it comes to sex, we always think it's, maybe doing sexual acts outside of marriage, which certainly that definitely has consequences. And there is some baggage we can bring into marriage. But I think what we often don't talk about, especially in the church as a whole, is the baggage that we can kind of get without even realizing it by not talking about sex. And by it being this dirty thing that we just, heaven forbid you even talk about it, and even worse, think about it. And what we forget is like God made us as sexual beings, and he made it to bring a husband and wife closer together than anything else ever could. And like Dave said, I mean, it's not just physical, and that's awesome, but it's that spiritual side of it. It's the emotional and the mental side of it. And kind of one of our kind of things that we really, really try to do in marriage ministry is really give couples a way to talk about this in a healthy way. And this is part of our story because, I came from a home where I know my parents meant well. I know the intent was good, but they rarely talked about sex. And if I had questions, I remember in middle school, I had heard kind of this term that I didn't know what it was. So I went and asked my mom, and it was like, shut it down. We will never talk. Like,
that doesn't exist.
Horrified. No, it was.
Where did you learn that word?
It was like, whoever said that,
hang out with
you
those
can't
people
hang out with that girl. And, it was very, and I know, again, I know it came from a place of trying to protect me, but what ended up happening is it ended up making sex this dirty little secret, this dirty thing. And it messed with me, and so that was some baggage I brought into our marriage. And so we want to give couples a way to talk about it because we do all come from different backgrounds and we want to be able to talk about sex because it is an important part of marriage.
And we have a lot of people that listen to this show just since it is First Dallas, and we're in ministry and have been our whole lives. But for student ministry with Ryan and me, the first event I ever started, because I was worried to plan my first event. And he was like, well, what do you care about? I was like, I care about who people date. Yeah. And he's like, what do you like? I was like, I like sugar. And so we called it Sugar. And like the unofficial tagline was talk about your current and future sugars, which did not make it on a t-shirt, but I thought it was funny. And it ended up being like our best girls event for years. But that was because I cared so much about, I'm a therapist by trade. Yes. Like I very much cared about talking about this, but it really was kind of a double-edged sword because you wanted to tell girls, this was a girls event, how special it is and how it's worth waiting for. But then, of course, people are upset about purity culture, acting like it's the biggest thing in the world. And if you mess up, there's just no good marriage out there. And, you're just kind of second rate.
Right.
And so that was difficult to navigate. We would, talk about how special it is and then talk about season of purity. But then as the years went on, we had to introduce, I definitely had to introduce trauma. And what happens whenever it wasn't your choice or when something happened that you didn't understand and you're carrying around that shame. And so I know y'all like to enjoy helping people heal from trauma in that area.
Sure.
What can y'all just speak to that a little bit of how that gets carried into marriage and as adults?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that it's huge. And I think so many times we hold in, especially sexual trauma. We, a lot of times keep that kind of thing from our spouse because we don't want them to see us differently. That's what we hear from couples that we work with. It's like, well, I just don't want him to look at me differently or her to look at me differently. And what happens is when we hold that in and we don't get the healing that we need, we end up really creating a wall. And you see just a breakdown of intimacy. When I say intimacy, it's not code word for sex. I mean like just the connection that God wants us to have as a husband and wife. And so it definitely is something that we need to be, Dave always says it this way, we need to be the safest place on earth for our spouse, where whatever it is that we need to tell them, whether it's something someone did to us or maybe something we did, we need to talk to our spouse about it because, when we hold things kind of in secret, that's the enemy's game. Like that's how he just convinces us to just hold on to shame, that we're not good enough, that God can never forgive us, that surely our spouse could never forgive us. And that's just a lie. And those lies really, they keep us from having the naked marriage that we talk about. And so it's really important to talk about it.
Yeah. And just to understand that no matter what you've done in terms of your own choices that you regret or what's been done to you in terms of, like you said, Julia, things that were inflicted on you where you were abused, and those wounds can be very, very deep. But in either case, the promise holds true that we can become a new creation in Christ.
Yes.
That he really does have the power and the desire to really renew us and bring healing from the inside out, where that can now just become part of our testimony and not become part of our identity. And just letting people realize that you don't have to allow that to continue to have a grip over you, whether it's from regret from your own choices or just the mixed confusion and anger and shame and all the different things that come when you've been the victim of abuse, that it doesn't have to in any way be part of your identity. It can just be part of your testimony. And, two of the bravest young women we know had been two sisters who had been babysitters for us for years and years, just like part of our family. And it came out later on that they, came to us and said, listen, we've been working through something and it's finally come in public, but their stepfather had been abusing them in the worst kinds of ways. And they finally got to a place where they said it's time to confront this, and they brought it out into the light. And now thankfully that man is in prison where he belongs. And both of these young women who we're so proud of, they have, they've married, they're in healthy marriages. They've done the work to get the counseling and the process of working through this and really allowing their story to be shared so that others who've also been victims can know that, hey, you're not alone. And you're not damaged goods. You're not alone. You're going to get through this. And we want to be a safe place to talk to you. And there are others as well. Once something comes from the darkness out into the light, it doesn't ever have nearly as much power over you. And if you are listening right now and you have been victimized in any way at any point, I know those scars can be so deep and so long lasting, but just know that Jesus is with you in that pain. He loves you. He cares for you. And he wants you to have healing and freedom.
Yes. I want to make sure we talk about two things because one, porn is so prevalent, and unfortunately we're still having to convince people it's bad. So let's talk about why it's bad. And then I work more with young adults now, and I want us to talk about how what you do now does affect marriage later and what to do if you've messed up and that kind of stuff. So let's talk about porn. I remember reading it's the average age, right? A boy first sees porn is 8. Is it 7 or 8? Y'all are the experts.
I believe last time was 8 is what I heard.
Right.
It keeps working down.
I mean, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. So can y'all just speak to why porn is so damaging?
Yeah, I can say, first off, from personal experience that, I live, this is a unfortunate part of my testimony. And I know from personal experience what it does to a mind and what it does to completely sabotage relationships and your own views of yourself and of the human body and of the gift of sex and all of those things. But beyond that, and beyond millions of others who have a testimony similar to mine who could talk about it, the neuroscience research that studies brain scans says that porn addiction mimics a heroin addiction in terms of how it carves out new neural pathways in the brain and really rewires our very thinking in a very, very negative way. So it's unhealthy. It ultimately sabotages relationships. So I think some people will watch porn and justify it because they think, oh, we're spicing things up or we're learning new things or whatever justification might be. But the long-term research shows that people who consistently look at porn actually have much less satisfying relationships, much less satisfying marriages, even much less satisfying sex lives, because porn doesn't train the brain to actually be satisfied. It warps the brain to never be satisfied, and certainly not to be satisfied with a healthy monogamous marriage, which is the only kind of marriage that God intended. And then spiritually, it's damaging because it looks at an eternal soul created in the image of God, and it reduces that person to just a body to be used mentally or mentally for our own fantasy, and it strips that person of their humanity. And as we do that, we partake in that, we're stripping ourselves of our own humanity in many ways. And so that's why the Bible has so much to say, not only about sexual sin, but even about the sin of lust itself, because what happens in our mind is really the birthplace for everything that we do and everything that we think. Yeah. And like you said, people still argue that even in the church, we have Christian people that argue with us and say,
yes, we get messages.
We have Christian people
that'll hear some argument.
That'll write us and say like, oh, you're being closed-minded, or this helps us. And I'm just thinking,
like, we're not hurting anyone.
I promise it doesn't help you. I promise.
Well, so let's just take a minute and say most of the people, a vast majority involved in porn started out being sex trafficked.
Exactly.
And so it does very much hurt. You can't separate porn and human trafficking.
Exactly.
And abuse of all kinds.
And abuse
100%.
and all of it. And then, also on the other end, how many of them end up committing suicide?
Yes.
So and there's always going to be porn if there's a demand for it. So we have to, especially as Christians, lessen the demand for it. So there you go.
I know, but there is this narrative. Like it really is shocking. And when we first started doing this work, we couldn't believe that people couldn't get on board. Like, okay, you may struggle with it, but can't you agree that it's not good for you? And most people would agree. Most hate themselves for it. They hate the fact that they are drawn to that and they're engaged in that. But there is this, there's kind of this other side where they're trying to convince them, oh, no, if your spouse knows about it, no big deal. Or if you're doing it together, no big deal. But really the damage is there. And really what we often find when we've talked to couples about this is it might be one spouse pressuring their spouse to say it's okay. Yeah. And what they don't realize is they're manipulating their spouse and just deeply wounding them. And, I know that wound because early in our marriage, I found in our computer and you hold your spouse. Hi, I didn't believe it at first. I literally thought someone broke in our house and looked it up. And then it was like the Holy Spirit knocking me over the head saying, Ashley, you've felt like something was off. Here's what it is. And those days and months and even years that followed, they weren't easy, but I was so glad that I did find it because then I could finally address it. And Dave immediately admitted to it. We got filtering software on all of our computers, still have them till this day, because this was many, many years ago. And it's even easier to access today, if you don't have filters. And we had to
down 75.
Exactly. Well, you're exactly right. No, it's so true. And I mean, there's just so much out there kind of drawing our eyes. And so, we've worked through that. And it was, there were a couple of relapses. That's very normal when someone's recovering from a porn addiction. But I'm so glad that we worked through that because I really believe, and I want to say this so that people who are maybe currently in this dynamic right now, I want them to hear this, that it is awkward at first. And your feelings, if you're the person who's been wronged by this, your feelings are going to be all over the place. You're going to be mad one day, you're going to be sad, disgusted, shocked. There's just going to be all kinds of different feelings, but we have to hold tight to God. And we also have to remember on those days that we feel sorry for ourselves and we want to hold it over our spouse's head, we have to remember that we too need Jesus, that we're not perfect. Maybe porn wasn't our issue, but there's other issues.
Yeah.
And that's why, we talk about this naked marriage thing, because secrets are the enemies of intimacy. And so we've got to put everything out on the table and deal with it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what you'll find is when we fully surrender it to God and we're honest with our spouse, even when it starts out really ugly, he can really bring us together in a powerful way. Yeah. But it is really awkward at first, and it's hard.
You gotta work through the awkward.
Got to work through it.
I want us to talk about real quick, just as we're closing, single people, people that are not married. And I mean, it's hard to believe, but this next generation, I mean, they're like the generation with the lowest marital statistics.
Right.
So they're not getting married till later, trying to stay pure till they're 30, which, we're interested in dating when we're 13. So, I mean, that's a pretty big time gap.
A lot of gears.
There.
A lot of gears.
Right. And I think just a lot of the girls I talk to don't necessarily understand the connection between what they do in their single years and marriage. So can y'all just give your best advice for singles as we're wrapping up today?
Absolutely. I want to say, definitely don't compromise your standards, and the young people. I actually lead a group of ninth grade, a small group of ninth grade girls, and I just love them. And there was a series we did kind of in our youth group where we were talking about relationships. And one thing that I think that there's a fear of dating for this generation, which is really interesting. They're prolonging even starting to date at all. You talked about the desire at 13. We're normally, at least where we are in Georgia, like what we're seeing is that they're waiting until even college to even have a first date. And what you'll find too is there, maybe even before they actually are dating someone, there's this push to engage in some kind of sexual activity. I don't know.
I mean, just interested in the opposite sex, but they're not dating.
Right, right. They're just interested. Well, right. Well, they're interested.
They're
like
not.
They have eyes.
Right.
They're like, that person's really cute. And, they're prolonging the actual dating part and getting to know someone. And what you're seeing is kind of this push, even among Christians, to kind of explore physically before they actually date. And so because of that, what I'm finding is there's kind of this anxiety around dating. And then, therefore, there's anxiety around marriage. And I would just tell them, you don't have to compromise your standards. It's okay. Like you're talking about standing alone. It's okay if you do things differently. Like you don't have to follow the culture. You set your standards based on what God says. And, but with that, not compromising your standards, don't be afraid to meet someone. Intimacy, I think there is just such anxiety around intimacy and being known and fully knowing someone else. And I would say it's just so beautiful. We don't have to be afraid of it. And one of the best ways you can find a spouse is becoming best friends with them first. Like Dave and he is my best friend in the whole world. And I love that. Like I believe the best marriages are between two best friends. And I think that we have to get ourselves out there and put ourselves around people who share our values, because we don't want to make that mistake where we get our heart mixed up with someone who doesn't even follow God, you know?
Okay, so I have a whole theory that one reason people aren't getting married is because of all the sexual addiction. Because if you're, like, that's just my running theory. Because really, wanting to have sex is a reason to get married. Right. So if you're pure and you're waiting, either season of purity or, you've always waited, like that desire drives getting married quickly earlier. Yeah. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But can you say something just to guys about why it's great to get married and it's better than extramarital or premarital stuff?
It is the best. I'm telling you, like when you can do it God's way, marry your best friend, find a woman who loves Jesus, who loves you, and you're going to live the best version of your life being her husband. And my goodness, like when I think about where I would be without Ashley, like I would be, I don't even want to think about it. I'm enough a work in progress with her, like helping me every step of the way. But I think you're exactly right though, Julia, about how I think some of that sexual addiction and just a very self-focused, selfish mentality as it relates to sex is sabotaging people because, like I said, pornography and other things can make sex be a solo sport. Essentially, I don't even need another person now. And I can do this as something to consume for my own pleasure. I don't even need someone else. And then when I find another person, my brain has been so programmed that I'm going to just continue on in that and end up using this person as if they just exist to meet this need for me. And that's really the opposite of how God designed marriage and real intimacy. It should be like this act of mutual serving and loving one another, not just in sex, but in every part of your relationship. But I think that for whatever reason, you're right, there is a fear that young people have, maybe young men in particular, like, oh my goodness, I don't want to commit. I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready for that. And they keep putting it off and putting it off. And then the longer that we live single, then the harder it is really to blend your lives together because you've really you've gotten your own ways down. You know, it was easier for us because we were so young. We didn't have any money to combine. We didn't have any.
Same.
Yeah, we didn't have anything to combine. It was like
nothing.
Let's combine
we
our
had to combine our clothes into our one closet.
There you go.
That's true. That's true.
And then you just figure it out together. You build a life together. But at any season stage, don't ever feel like, oh, it's too late for me or it's too this for me. Like right where you are, God has a plan for you. And you don't have to live in regret. You don't have to live in shame. Even if you had done things you regret, embrace God's grace, learn from the past and say, Lord, I'm committing right now today. I want to do things your way, whether that means living single your way, whether that means pursuing marriage your way or being married your way.
Right.
And God will meet you right where you are. And he'll lead you to the opportunities that he wants you to have. But you also have to be willing to have the courage sometimes to reach out and grab opportunities and put yourself out there. And so you guys, you men, let me talk to you for a second. Be willing to call that girl, right? I mean, if God's already put some godly young lady into your life, you know, have the courage to give her a call, not just a text. I know that's all you want to do is send her a text, but actually call her, hear her voice.
She'll be shocked.
Yes. And you slide into her DMs, but actually give her your phone number.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
that is great.
Be willing to make that move.
And can I say something really quick?
Yes.
I found, and we found kind of in the work we do, so many prolonged marriage because they're like, I come from a home where it was so bad. Like marriage was just the marriage that I saw in my home, my parents.
Yeah.
It was just not what I wanted. I saw what they went through in their divorce or maybe their subsequent marriages and divorces. And they're like, I don't want that. So I'm just going to wait. They put an age on it. I'm going to wait till I'm 30 and I may not even get married at 30. And I remember actually at a recent conference, we met this young couple and they just stick out of my mind. And they were probably 21, 22 years old. And they said, listen, can you pray for us? Because here's our story. We both came from broken homes. We literally do not know how to be married, but we do know that God has given us the power to start a new legacy for our families. They both said that and they had tears in their eyes. And they said, can you just pray that for us? Because we're trying to go and learn. And that's why we're at this conference. And that's why we're joining a small group at church. And so if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, let that be your story. If that's you, if you came from families where you saw a lot of brokenness, that doesn't have to be something you continue. You can choose today to have a new legacy for your family.
And the important thing with that, of course, is they want to do something different, but they're also learning how to do something different.
For sure.
It doesn't just magically happen, even if we are Christians.
Right.
Well, obviously, we could talk for 3 hours. So we're coming to an end. Can you just tell our listeners how to stay connected to you about your new book and how they can just have more Dave and Ashley?
Sure.
Yeah. And thank you, Julia, for having us and for everything you're doing on this program. So our ministry is called XO Marriage. It's also based here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but we do events all over the country and have a lot of online resources. You can go to XO, that's letter X, letter O, marriage.com and get a whole bunch of stuff there. And then our podcast, Ashley and I, that we host together is called the Naked Marriage Podcast. You can listen to that. And one final thing, you can check us out on Instagram at Dave and Ashley Willis. And if you got a specific question, you can even write us there and we'll do our best to write you back and give you some resources that might help.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being on today.
It's our
Thank
pleasure.
You so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Unapologetic. Remember that you can listen to today's episode and more wherever you get your podcasts and at ptv.org/Julia.